Are we about ready to get started? So, we gonna do any intros, or we just gonna dive right into it? So, good evening, everyone. My name is Christopher Lillian Stolpe. I'm the CTO for Solutions and one of the co-founders at Tigera. And since tonight's theme is about visibility, I thought I'd kick off the evening talking about visibility into communication paths and who's actually exercising communication paths in your infrastructure. So the title is Who's Really Talking and What Are the Real Communication Paths in your stack, both the ones you know and the ones you don't and didn't intend to have. So we're going to spend a little time talking about that. And after we're done with that, we're going to hear from Lightstep on application visibility, and I think that's going to be a pretty cool talk as well. And if there are questions afterwards, we're going to do a fireside chat if there are interesting questions. So, starting off, information exchange. Bonus points if anyone can tell me what that site is. But do you really know what information exchange paths exist in your stacks? If not you, who does? And are you sure that your information is correct? And if you're sort of wondering about this statement, you're going to say, what? Are you worried? What's there to be worried about? So let's talk a little bit about why you might want visibility into what's going on in your infrastructure, and also, why are we talking about this now? This isn't a new problem. So why are we talking about this now? And one of the reasons we're talking about this now is it's an existing old problem, but it's got some new contours. And that's because we're in this new microservice containerized world. And so I thought I'd call out some of the differences that you might see between getting visibility into your network in the heritage world, because legacy has such bad connotations, so we'll call it heritage world, and in your new microservice world. In the heritage world, a lot of your communications were opaque, or at least much more difficult to surface, because most of them happened within the bounds of a compiled application. So they were making library calls, etc. It was inter-process communication, maybe, but it was very much opaque to within the bounds of the application. So surfacing what was being communicated was somewhat more difficult. Also, applications are big and complex with lots of connectivity requirements that have grown over potentially decades. So actually knowing everything that a given application or compiled binary needs becomes a bit of an interesting exercise. For those of you, I'm sure no one has ever had this experience of firewall cruft. It's like no one ever touches the firewall rules because you never know what you're going to break. You don't think that rule's being used anymore, but do you really know? A good little story on that. Not quite firewall rules, but it's an interesting case in point. A large company I used to work for, who shall remain nameless, I will protect the guilty, had a mini, as in a Sperry Univac mini, still sitting on the machine room floor. The screen, the VT220 equivalent screen, for those of you who are old enough to remember VT220s, was pretty much almost completely dead. You sort of had to look at it just the right way and shield it so you could actually still see the text. And so people say, this thing hasn't been touched in literally years. It must not be necessary, so they turned it off in a maintenance window. And sure enough, the next day, no one was screaming, so they let it go for a couple weeks and said, okay, no one was using this anymore. And you know where the story is going, because they pretty much decommissioned it. It had been rolled out, but not thrown in the dumpster yet. And all of a sudden, quarter and close fails, because there was some component of the booking system that still evidently had some little dependency on something in that Univac mini. So it became not only get the mini back up, but even to the point of trying to find anyone who knew how to recommission a Sperry Univac mini in end of 2009-ish time frame. So, So, do you really know who's talking? And when was the last time anyone vetted that? However, the thing to keep in mind with the heritage environment is external connectivity was usually pretty understandable. It was a very specific requirement. This application needs to talk to this application. So for the connections that do exist, and you go to the trouble to figure out what they are, you sort of knew what they were doing. Let's step over to the microservice world. You know, the green point on this one is microservices are simple and have lots less input-output chains. So really, if you think about a microservice, if you do this right, if you forklift your heritage application into a container and think that's going to solve all your problems, what you actually just did was bought the worst of both worlds, and you brought all the sins along with you. It's not going to get you out of trouble. So if you refactor, you go into a microservices infrastructure, each microservice does one thing. It does it. You know, it's a fairly well-contained, well-understood little box, and has a limited number of input and output channels. So understanding each microservice's requirements should be somewhat easier. However, there are a lot more of them. And because you're no longer doing things as library calls, etc., everything that was a library call before is now a HTTP REST call or gRPC call or something along those lines. So there's a lot more of intra-microservice communications. Might be a few channels, but there's a lot more going on over those channels. And many of these are in the weeds API-specific things. Basically means it's going to be a little bit harder to understand why does this microservice need to talk to this microservice and what's it doing, because everything you used to build in is now externalized. Another advantage, which I didn't put out here, is because it's surfaced on the network, it makes it somewhat easier to take a look at. Other interesting environmental challenges in these models. Heritage is or was static, or mostly so. Most people think VMs, as a general rule, are dynamic compared to physical servers. They are. But most VMs still last months or years. And their identifiers are also somewhat static. And this becomes sort of interesting when we talk about network logging in a little bit. And an IP address for a given service will probably always be the IP address for that service over the lifetime of that service. So, and you measure these things in calendar time. VMs are measured as in what day or what month or what quarter you stood the thing up in. The flows are also somewhat static. Because these things are basically static, you're not pushing code quite so frequently, etc., that once you've characterized your network flows, in this kind of environment, they tend to be more static or stable than in the new world. In the new world, one of the reasons we're going to microservices is to get